clarity around quality of information, clarity around goals and expectations, I think should stand firms in good stead. From an audit only perspective, sort of visibility through a process, and I think transparency on both sides is clearly paramount. There is an underlying tension in these things in terms of moving towards a valuation and a price that sort of suits both parties, but having detailed management information I think is absolutely key, and something that will resonate with you, getting that data room nice and tidy, the basics, compliance, all those sorts of things, and having the house in good order before effectively embarking on this, I think probably minimises risk and the potential for sort of frustration and or upset on both sides.
Welcome back to the Katchr Podcast. Here we like to unpack the numbers, strategy and future of the legal sector. I'm Graham Moore, and today's guest is Hywel Pegler, Director at RSM UK and a long-time advisor to law firms on financial performance, compliance and strategic change. Today, we're going to dive into a whole host of topics: sector-wide financial trends, private equity, AI and the latest from the SRA. So, Hywel, it's great to have you here.
Thanks very much, Graham. Really pleased to be able to contribute and looking forward to the discussion, because, as you say, there's an awful lot going on.
There is, absolutely. So let's just start with a little bit about your journey. How did you come to focus on the legal sector, and what kind of work are you doing with law firms at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, it's something that I've done really for my whole career. So I started out many moons ago as an audit assistant back in London, and yeah, some of my first exposure to audit work was in the legal profession and dealing with law firms specifically. So I suppose I kind of had my first toe in the water at that stage of my career, and it's something that I've really enjoyed. I've enjoyed interacting with finance teams in the legal sector, and I don't know, I've just had an interest in sort of people businesses really, and that's evolved more broadly than law. So deal now with consultants, architects, anyone who's effectively selling time and expertise, but probably a core part of my role is around legal. And look, I'm an audit partner by trade at RSM, but just as of the 1st of April, I've taken on a broader role heading up our national professional and business services business unit effectively. So looking after audit, tax and compliance for RSM across that very broad church of industries. Legal's clearly a key part. So I spend an awful lot of time dealing with legal CFOs, COFAs and intermediaries and getting a feel for what's going on in the market. And yeah, just in terms of client base, really varied, all shapes and sizes. I guess sort of smaller end of client would be around the 30-40 turnover million, all the way up to sort of 750 million international firms. So a really nice and varied spread, which hopefully gives me a decent perspective on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, a good perspective there. So it'd be great if we could start by, just zooming out a little bit. And how would you describe the current financial health of the UK legal sector?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And actually, we've been doing a little bit of research internally as to how professional services and legal have actually outperformed GDP for several years now, even kind of casting our minds back to COVID. And look, I think broadly speaking, firms are growing. You're sort of seeing that top line trend. And again, when I talk about this, it's clearly in generalizations. There are specific reasons for growth or a bit of stagnation here, there and everywhere. But I think the general trend has been that turnover is ticking up. Cost pressures are there. But as I say, broadly, I think that firms have had a reasonable time of things, and certainly not too bad a 24-25 calendar year. I think one of the interesting things about that is the sort of position on interest, which clearly has been a feature of P&Ls over the last 2 or 3 years in particular. So kind of whether or not that's masking some operational inefficiencies or sort of challenges on the cost base, discuss. But yeah, generally, I think the client base is faring pretty well, despite various challenges and issues around expectation and delivery. Yeah, I think that's probably an overall assessment.
And would you say there's any particular winners, any particular sectors or areas that are showing showing better results than others?
Well, certainly some of the employment divisions with firms I'm working with are sort of doing ever so well. I think that larger firms, well, all firms actually will breathe a sigh of relief when and if there's a bit more clarity around the sort of corporate environment and whether or not M&A and deals can kind of pick up to some of the previous levels expected before. So I think. What do I think? I think that the more diverse the practice is, clearly you sort of have that natural hedge in terms of overall positioning and results. But I think there's sort of peaks and troughs across the piece.
And in terms of firms of different sizes, different types of firms, are you seeing any differences in performance across those?
I think, again, terming those in the mid-market, I think two or three certainly within my client base really have sort of turned a corner. And I think that's probably a feature of or driven by sort of deep understanding of the key drivers of their business and the management information, and actually doing a deep dive into some of the strategy, and that's really paid off. And again, one firm in particular, and again, I'll keep these all nameless, sort of relatively heavy sort of real estate department and division, and that's really sort of turned around and come back on stream. So I think getting into things, strategic vision and planning has led to some growth in that instance.
Okay. And you mentioned interest rates. Obviously, there's been a lot of volatility recently with interest rates and inflation. They're impacting on all businesses to some extent. How would you say those macroeconomic factors are impacting, if at all, on law firms?
Yeah, well, there's been all sorts, isn't there? As you say, interest rates being one, and I think our view, certainly the view of our economist, Tom Pugh, is that they're never going to retreat back to the levels that we saw sort of post-COVID of the sort of 1 or 2%. I think we'll probably see a sort of stabilization, whether it's 3 in time or whatever the latest projections are. We've obviously had a period of acute wage inflation in professional services. I mean, I think that's never going to go away necessarily. It's certainly never going to retreat, but I think it's perhaps cooling ever so slightly in terms of some of the discussions that I've been having recently. I think, I suppose this is a more practical point, an operational point, but things like funding for basis period reform, which I know has been a huge topic for many firms out there, and just making sure that they've got their capital structure right. Read a point around interest rates, I think has been an important one. So we'll see, but I think we're used to a pretty volatile world now in terms of planning, and a sort of an uncertain one. So again, I just encourage all sort of leaders out there just to map through as best you can with deep sensitivity analysis around these things to really give yourself the best chance of dealing with any wider economic headwinds.
Yeah. And you mentioned funding again there. So we're seeing a growing interest in private equity within the legal sector.
We are, yeah, something that's not going away. I think some of the latest statistics I read was over $1 billion, I think 1.2 billion now in terms of investment in the legal sector and PE, and maybe half of that in 2024 alone. Now, from our side of the fence, we've seen a pronounced shift in terms of funding structures and moves towards private equity and accounting. For example, the landscape's really changed. I think, again, at latest count, and it changes every day, I think 18 of the top 30 firms now in the UK are funded by private equity. Now, again, this might be a controversial comment, but I think lawyers are typically a little more conservative, perhaps, and quite prudent. So I think it's been a slower burn. Well, absolutely has been a slower burn. And accepting that they are different business models with different sort of premises around their people and assets, and it's different work. It's not sort of necessarily recurring like audit, for example. I do see that changing, and I think there will be pressure to at least consider some of the funding arrangements that PE offers, particularly in light of the fact that we're, the investment that's needed in technology and AI for the future, which perhaps we'll come on to, is significant, and this is one way rather to secure some funding for that. So, yeah, private equity front and centre.
So, I mean, given that the legal sector is different, in a number of ways that you've mentioned, what do you think the level of appetite is from investors? Are you seeing that increasing?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is seen as attractive. And again, there is always the debate around, who owns the relationship? Is it the partner in question? Is it the firm? Where's the sort of underlying recurring revenue stream, et cetera, et cetera? But private equity firms, and certainly the ones that I've dealt with, are pretty smart cookies. They want their 2 times, 3 times exit ultimately. So I think they work through these various not challenges, but considerations when kind of going through a deal, understand what the levers are and put structures and positions in place, in terms of, a kind of capital payment to the partner group up front. Yeah, sure. But actually what levers are in place to ensure continuity of business and delivery over that 3 to 5 year period. So yeah, I think appetite is real, and I think it will increase and probably move further up the sort of food chain, so to speak.
Yeah. And from the law firm side, do you think firms fully understand the implications of this type of investment? It's still very new to the sector.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think one of the issues that I think firms are going to, again, not struggle, but will need to understand is that sort of, I suppose, notional loss of control. Because historically, and again, I'm a partner myself at my firm RSM, and there's a degree of, clearly ownership in terms of members' capital, but also a feeling of a sort of collegiate atmosphere. You're one of a number of partners. Well, that possibly does change through the onset of PE funding and/or a new investor and a corporate structure. So that's certainly one thing that I think will need to be thought about carefully by a partner group. I suppose sort of flipping it slightly. One issue that's been a perennial challenge for legal firms is succession. So a capital event like this is something that could help, that could assist, and actually is a nice, neat way, perhaps, of rounding things off for a firm. And as I said, I've seen various structures, both on the accountancy side as well as on the legal side, that are flexible and actually designed to work for all parties to achieve that further growth down the line.
Yeah. So you mentioned succession. What are the other opportunities for the law firms, if they're considering PE involvement, and possibly what are the risks as well?
Yeah, well, I think there's the sort of idea around consolidation, and whether or not that's PE backed or slightly more, I guess it's counterintuitive, but organic consolidation, so to speak. I wouldn't be surprised to see a sort of period of that ensuing. Back to sort of opportunities, again, that funding structure comes in. As I said, I mentioned tech. That is the hot topic, and anything ranging from kind of initial forays with Copilot, so to speak, and all the way up to what's the law firm of the future going to look like. Funding for that's clearly not cheap. It requires capital investment. So PE could be a way to sort of fund some of that, as well as kind of more broad initiatives around ESG, for example.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll come back to the tech side, but I'm interested if you've personally worked with firms going through a deal or courting investors, and if that's the case, sort of what lessons have stood out to you from that experience so far?
Yeah, I've certainly had, from an audit-only perspective, sort of visibility through a process, and I think transparency on both sides is clearly paramount. There is an underlying tension in these things in terms of moving towards a valuation and a price that sort of suits both parties, but having detailed management information, I think, is absolutely key, and something that will resonate with you. Getting that data room nice and tidy, the basics, compliance, all those sorts of things, and having the house in good order before effectively embarking on this, I think probably minimises risk and the potential for sort of frustration and/or upset on both sides, because it's it's not necessarily easy, and it's high pressure to work through. So yeah, I think clarity around quality of information, clarity around goals and expectations, I think should stand firms in good stead.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the technology side of things, mentioned it a couple of times. Artificial intelligence, potentially something that may benefit significantly from additional funding, but it's top of mind, I think, for a lot of law firms. But what are you seeing? Is it a lot of hype, or are there some real actionable use cases already that you're seeing on the ground?
It's a bit of a mixture. to be honest with you, and again, your sort of question, I've highlighted it a couple of times. It's a hot topic, but actually I haven't sort of seen, and I think it would be foolhardy for anyone to see or predict with absolute certainty how this all sort of plays out. I mean, what I have seen is arrangements where a law firm will just take an employment matter and say there's 150 sort of standardized letters to go. Well, they've engaged with their client on the proviso that actually AI and or a product will draft these and write these. There will be human oversight and sort of sample checking, but actually it's sort of derived from the technology, and that's a neater solution. And if all parties are sort of happy with that, then that's cost effective. It kind of back to the debate around, is the chargeable hour dead, etc. Value-based pricing is kind of an example. So I have seen those practical uses. I've seen firms approach it in different ways, whether it's sort of setting up broad committees to sort of run with this and look at this, or whether it's just giving staff access to sort of tools to sort of have a play. It's really, really varied. I don't think there's a right answer. The only thing I think I would say, and again, I say this as a sort of professional services practitioner myself, it is going to change things, and there is doing nothing isn't really an option, I would suggest.
Do you have any thoughts on where the most immediate impacts might be? Is it like to be in finance, client service delivery, and compliance? Any particular?
Yeah, well, I think some of these are sort of LMN tools. I think in terms of deciphering large contracts and shifting and sifting through large data sets, I think is absolutely key. I think from a finance perspective as well, I think the sort of ability to cut through and identify trends and to drive a more nuanced and efficient process behind the scenes and really give management some excellent tools, I think is going to be critical as well, and a sort of real development. But as I say, the sort of broader question as to whether or not there'll be interface between various different systems that are talking to each other, or in the future, are we just going to cut out the middleman? Like, who knows? I always still feel that there will be a place for that human-led interaction and oversight, though I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon.
From a CFO's perspective, if you're looking at the sort of financial implications for a law firm, do you think they're going to be looking at AI delivering cost savings or productivity gains? You mentioned the billable hour. Are we coming into a period where there's going to be really significant change, for the first time in many years in terms of pricing models?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think that the billable hour debate's been around as long as I have, frankly, in the profession. But I really do think that this time it might lead to sort of meaningful change, simply because of how powerful these tools are, and I think how exponentially they're going to develop really, really quite quickly. So I think it is significant. I think that the change could be pretty pronounced. I think it could be, as I said, the sort of productivity and efficiency gains. Yes, that's a sort of an easy tick and a sort of basic win. That then should translate into sort of freeing up resource logically for other things as you go. And I think, one of the interesting things, I think accountants, lawyers, what's the sort of traditional pyramid going to look like in the future in terms of proportionality of partners to other fee earners, whether it's associates, senior associates, or in our world, supervisors and managers, etc. What does that look like? How do you train people? How do people develop the sort of more broad general skills that you need to be an advisor? So I think all of these issues and all of this stuff comes into play. But as I said, I'm not sure I could speak confidently about an absolute answer at this point.
Yeah. What are your thoughts around the whole area of compliance then? It's always there in regulated profession, and and you sort of be right in the center of that. So technology impacting on that.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly impacting on the way that we're undertaking various reviews, whether that's statutory audit or for example, SRA, where we can do some really nifty things in terms of a data analytics as opposed to perhaps AI on testing clients' accounts. And that's actually been quite a big feature of the work that we've been doing this year and dealing with clients, advising clients around client money, because as you'll be well aware, it's pretty topical in terms of what's been going on at the SRA and leadership changes, as well as some of the sort of more broad and high profile issues and cases. So that's really key to our thinking this year.
Yeah. So you mentioned the SRA, and there's been recent movement around COFA responsibilities. Could you give us a quick state of play on that?
Yeah, well, the consultations sort of happened and we fed back in as a firm. And I think that, again, from conversations with clients, what firms are really looking for is a bit of clarity, frankly. And I know it's sort of really, really difficult. I think people have the best of intentions in terms of how they're setting up their systems and controls and really want to do the right things 9 times out of 10. But fundamentally, it's so important. We're having to spend more time as an external auditor dealing with these matters and doing these reviews, because it's just so important and fundamental to the provision of services. I mean, one of the debates has been the sort of outsourced model, whether or not you have a sort of third party take on some of those roles and responsibilities in terms of dealing with client money. But I can't say I've had or seen huge sort of take up for that option just yet. I think there's probably a debate around risk and responsibilities and how that kind of works and sort of fits together in terms of the COFA. But yeah, it's certainly front and center from a compliance standpoint.
What are the likely knock-on effects for reporting accountants? And are expectations rising in terms of scrutiny?
And not dissimilar to what we've seen on the statutory audit side in more over the last 5-10 years or however long. It is really investing far more time in planning procedures, interpreting the risk assessment, making sure there's linkages between our stat audit and the SRA reporting, because it's business critical. Reputational damage and risk is huge in this area. So we're certainly investing more time in our work and testing, and as a result, having more conversations with CFOs and COFAs about how this is all controlled and making sure it's being dealt with appropriately. And of course, in terms of reporting accountant, are we going to submit all unqualified AR1s now? Or, how does that kind of land in terms of some of the sort of reporting obligations? So yeah, it's an interesting time.
How would you say firms are responding, and how are COFAs feeling about this? Are they feeling more exposed, or?
I think possibly, and it's been interesting to see, I suppose, the development of kind of broader conversations, which historically may have been the purview of the CFO or the FD, and if a different individual is the COFA, they are typically having a few more conversations with me as reporting accountant, I'd say. So I think as I said, some recent news, recent changes, just the whole spotlight on this as an issue and regulation has really focused the minds. I think that's fair to say.
And any specific sort of top advice right now for COFAs who just want to stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, I think just engage with understanding the rules, ensuring clarity in terms of expectations with sort of CFO as to how these things are sort of dealt with. And again, just this is really general. I'm sure everyone listening to this will be well aware of the hot topics around things like the basics of residual balances, how are you dealing with those, how are you addressing those, dealing with interest, making sure that that's sort of front and center in terms of T's and C's and just clarity around that point. Banking facilities, a hot topic, always a hot topic in terms of client-to-client transfers, etc. Who you're engaging with, and the whole anti-money laundering piece is critical as well. And we've all seen the fines that have been levied recently in some of the high-profile cases. So, as I said, I think it's not often overlooked, but I just think that compliance piece has been a feature of the work over the last sort of 12 to 18 months from our perspective.
Yeah. So quite a lot going on, as always, for finance leaders, regulatory changes, pressures, investor interest. There's probably a lot of different directions they're being pulled in. So what would you say is the biggest strategic challenge facing law firm finance leaders in the coming year or so?
Gosh, that's such a big question, particularly in light of all the sort of topics that we've covered. I mean, I think it's just engagement and buy-in to an overarching plan that the firm has, and the differentiation between what tactically might make a good decision or might be a good decision in terms of operations and day to day and how the firm's functioning. But actually, what do you want to be in the future? Where do you want to go? How do you want to grow as a sort of firm, traditional LLP? Does that require that big P push to fund automation, or what are your USPs? What are you famous for? How's that going to work? So I think fundamentals of strategy and then building around tactical points to help assist you on the journey.
Would you say firms are getting better at the sort of strategic direction piece? I mean, my reading historically is that, not so long ago, law firms were just law firms and they were all heading in the same direction. And now there's an awful lot of alternative directions for them to choose. And do you think firm leadership is getting to grips with that and really identifying their own unique positioning?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's more, again, from conversations I'm having, there's more analysis, there's more appreciation of sort of wider market conditions, and firms are doing different things, whether that's investing in their own technology or whether that's looking at some sort of R&D play or growing internationally. It does seem to be a bit more of a feature, and it's certainly not the case of, last year plus 5% and maintain PEP or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that the CFOs, management teams are far more attuned to the opportunities as well as the risks that are coming from alternative providers, and just the whole landscape is changing. And I think therefore to survive and thrive in a changing world, there needs to be that clarity of strategy.
And would you say there's any particularly underappreciated opportunities right now? It's easy to take a sort of a negative defensive view with so much change going on, but usually when there is a lot of change, it opens up opportunities as well. Is there anything particular that you'd highlight?
Well, yeah, I think sort of back to the sort of people aspect, because fundamentally we're dealing with people here. I think some firms have taken a really interesting look at things like parental leave, for example. I know that there's sort of certain policies around that, which I think have been really forward thinking and quite innovative. Similarly around ESG, commitment to carbon offsets and sort of building strategy and structure along those lines, which again is attractive in a kind of competitive landscape where people are competing for talent. These type of initiatives, I think, are really helpful and can really pay dividends for firms, as well as a kind of forward thinking AI piece as well. Firms allocating big slugs of bonus pool for AI usage, I think is really interesting. So I think that there's lots of good things going on in the markets as well.
Yeah, it is a perennial thing, really. Whatever else is happening, it's ultimately a people business, isn't it? And
absolutely,
getting the right people is always the key.
Mm.
So you've seen high performing firms. You've probably seen underperforming firms. What are the consistent traits that you would say set the best ones apart?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think tone at the top is paramount, and the ability for leaders to bring people with them, I think, is absolutely critical. I always like the idea of sort of outward looking leadership and management teams who sort of have an appreciation of what's going on, challenges, risks, opportunities. But I really think clarity of thought and the ability to communicate effectively are traits of outstanding leadership teams, and therefore more likely successful firms ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, that leadership from the top piece, I think, certainly in my experience, it just makes such a difference.
No, indeed.
Yeah, clarity of vision to start with, and then aligning everyone with that vision.
Communication of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back over your career, is there a particular moment or insight that's fundamentally changed how you advise law firms today?
Again, that's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm very aware of is that actually the CFO role historically, just take a traditional sort of LLP law firm, could be quite a tricky place to be insofar as you've got various stakeholders that you need to engage with in terms of banks, auditors, accountants, regulators, and then you've got the sort of partner group to be dealing with as well. So you're getting pulled in lots of different directions, and I would imagine it can be quite a lonely place at times. So I think it's just having that empathy and just understanding that actually it's a really difficult job. And therefore, if through a piece of sound and timely advice, you can sort of help along the way or make an introduction or just offer a piece of insight, I think that's really helpful. And similarly, when dealing with an audit, for example, which has been, I suppose, my bread and butter, it's making that as effective, obviously robust and challenging, but sort of pain-free to some extent as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's again, it's back to the people thing. We're all in
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
business, and
Quite a theme. Yeah.
it's about dealing with people. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that sort of brings us back full circle, really, and yeah, um, completely about people as much as it is about tools.
Yeah.
So it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you very
Great. I've
much.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Where can listeners go to learn more about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So RSM website is a great place to be, and I'm relatively active on LinkedIn as well, and would be delighted to have a kind of broader conversation with anyone just about the market and what's going on. So please feel free to message for a coffee.
Okay. Thanks, Hywel. And to the audience, thanks for joining us on the Katchr Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with colleagues. And we'll be back soon with more insights for senior leaders who are navigating the future of law firm finance. Until next time, take care.
It's great.
Thank you.